Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our IMPLAN webinar, Inside Opportunity Zones with IMPLAN, a panel discussion on policy data and the future of opportunity zones. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am today with my co-host, Chris Brown, who's our Enterprise Account Manager here at IMPLAN. And of course, I'm Candy Klaus, the Vice President of Customer Success and Education Services here at IMPLAN. Should you have a question while we are presenting today, feel free to raise your hand, and at the end we'll ask you to unmute, or you can use the chat box that is located in the GoToWebinar box as well, and we will answer questions at the end. What are we looking to cover today? Well, just a little bit about opportunity zones. So what they have looked like in the past, what they are now, and the future of them. Some insights from our leaders here on policy and successful investment and how we measure that impact. So without further ado, I will kick things over to you, Chris.
Great, thank you, Candy. Thank you all for joining us today. It's an exciting opportunity. We brought in some great panelists to have a discussion, and we look forward to hearing some of your questions at the end from those that are able to join us. I just revisited it again yesterday, and I read the IMPLAN vision statement. I don't know the last time you read that, Candy, but looked at it yesterday on our website, and it reads, our vision is to empower global communities with innovative economic intelligence and modeling solutions for informed decision-making, sustainability insights, and transformative impact. It's a mouthful, but I was hard-pressed to think of another program that better aligns or really allows for the fulfillment of that vision on such a broad scale as opportunity zones. And I think we've seen that response among our customers to what the alignment between economic modeling and opportunity zones really is. So excited for this conversation, excited for the iterations in the program and what this can mean for understanding economic development and community investment. Ultimately, the fundamental goal of opportunity zones established in 2017 under the TCGA, apologies, forgot that acronym already, the fundamental goal was to establish a place-based incentive prioritizing low-income geographies to accelerate the attraction of capital with fewer strings attached. And it's an exciting opportunity and moment now because opportunity zones have already proven incredibly successful at attracting investments. In just the first 4 years of the program, they attracted over $80 billion in investment, 6 times the level of the new market tax credit program in less than half the time. And since 2022, estimates suggest that total investments have climbed above $100 billion. So, of course, with that success has come important questions about the program's impact on designated communities, and broader implications to surrounding areas. Those discussions have led to the reforms in the recent One Big Beautiful Bill that we'll be digesting and getting into today. So reforms ultimately were geared towards enhancing impact and improving transparency. So we're very fortunate to have our 2 leaders join us to help us unpack these programs' impacts and understand what these reforms mean going forward. So I'm excited to dive in. Joining us is Nick Rosenthal, the co-chief executive officer of Griffin Capital, a leading private real estate investment management firm. Nick championed Griffin's efforts to enter the qualified opportunity zone space. His team issued an economic impact report in May that really caught our attention, highlighting the firm has raised more than $1.9 billion in equity across 4 neighborhood-focused qualified opportunity zone funds involving 30-plus multifamily projects with a combined development cost of over $3.5 billion. So I want to let Nick get into that in a little more depth, but through his firm's application of IMPLAN, they've demonstrated their projects have contributed over $7.5 billion in total impact, supporting over 3,400 total jobs. Kenan Fikri, joining us, is a senior fellow at the Economic Innovation Group. EIG is a bipartisan public policy organization dedicated to forging a more dynamic and inclusive American economy. You know, Kenan is recognized as a leading scholar in economic geography and place-based economic development, having held positions at the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Brookings Institute, and the World Bank. But I think ultimately we're very fortunate to have Kenan here, as he has been deeply involved with the formation of opportunity zones, working in the development of opportunity zone, the predecessor legislation, the Investing in Opportunity Act. And really, he's been at the forefront of guiding policy discussions through his research and communications to drive investments into distressed areas. You know, he continues to write, you know, beautifully about the evidence of the program and the program's impact on local communities. I'll plug it again later, but I really encourage you to read his work and follow for updates. So Nick and Kenan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
And Kenan, we'll get it started. I'll pass it to you first to give us an update on the program and some of the reforms we've seen in the recent legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that great update, Chris, and great to be with you, Nick and Candy, and everyone on the webinar and with IMPLAN. So as Chris mentioned, you know, it's my pleasure to share some of the background on OZs, refresh real quick, you know, what opportunity zones are, and then importantly, kind of what the evidence is out there. Why do opportunity zones matter? You know, why are you here today, and why are we paying attention now? And you know, the answer to that is because opportunity zones really has been a significant driver of investment into communities. But because the data and reporting and really transparency regime that is finally in place kind of after the 2025 tax reform package was passed, because that didn't exist and hasn't existed up until now, we don't really, many folks out in the field don't even know the OZ investment and activity in their own communities and in their own backyards, even though it's been significant. So I want to try to walk you through, if you want to head to the next slide, walk you through some of the evidence that we have so far that we've cobbled together and been following this very closely to understand, the impact, the potential here, and to get folks ready for, a new permanent opportunity zones provision of the tax code. So some key facts. The limited data that we do have really testifies to the significance here. OZs have unlocked more than 100 billion in direct equity capital, taking advantage of the OZ tax incentives. As Nick will probably tell you later, OZ equity is only one tranche of an investment coming into communities. There are 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much grant capital, debt capital, other finance coming behind this 100 billion in OZ equity. There are right now 8,700 odd census tracts across the US, all states and all territories that are designated OZs. 3/4 of those tracts have seen investment, potentially higher through the incentive. And the typical tract that has received investment is, has extremely high poverty rate, nearly double the national average, and median household incomes and other measures of distress that really lag behind or point to the need for more private capital to help revitalize the communities. And in the best available academic evidence, we're starting to see, OZ designation producing large and meaningful and immediate development effects on building permits and housing, and increasingly in jobs and businesses, and some of the indicators that are a little more lagging as well. And a picture that includes, positive economic spillover benefits to neighboring areas. So we're talking about, by design, OZs was meant to catalyze additive new investments into communities, and we're seeing that be largely borne out in the data. Next slide, please. So these are two different graphs from two different sources, where the main point is to look at the trend line. And the trend line in opportunity zone fundraising has been steep and significant really since OZs was enacted. The chart on the left is the latest available estimates we have actually published from IRS and the Treasury. They only go through the end of 2022, which shows that 84.7 billion in OZ capital figure. But then the data on the right from Novogradac, which is a private services provider that surveys a large number of opportunity zone funds, but is only one portion of the market, kind of continues that trend onward. You can see it continues rising over time, but it flattens somewhat. However, the big takeaway is that opportunity zones, catalyzed a significant and ongoing increase in interest in investing in targeted communities that we fully expect to roll over into the OZ's 2.0 world that we find ourselves in, and probably with a much more predictable and kind of even sloped line in investment fundraising for some reasons I'll tell you about shortly. And next slide, please. And as Chris alluded to, opportunity zones, and as we saw on the fundraising slide, opportunity zones really kind of hit the ground running, so to speak, in reaching a large number of designated communities very quickly. Here, just for comparison, we're looking at the number of census tracts nationwide that have registered new markets tax credit investments since that program first started in 2003. You can see, it's a steady, regular annual allocation, so you get a steady, gradual increase in the number of American communities that have been touched by that program. You see opportunity zones started enacted in 2018. It took a couple years for activity to really ramp up, but when it did in a big way, such that by the end of 2022, again 3 years ago from where we are now, more census tracts had been touched by an opportunity zone investment than a new markets tax credit won in the lifetime of that program. So really broad reach in the number of communities registering investment here. Next slide, please. And this is meant here to reinforce that breadth. We're looking at the percent of all designated OZ census tracts registering investment across states. This data is extremely dated from the end of 2020, so just a couple years after OZ designation. However, this is the most recent available data on this particular measure that we've received from the Treasury Department. But it shows that already, at that point in time, nearly 3/4 of opportunity zones in many Western markets had already registered investment. And even in many Eastern markets from Indiana to Ohio, Florida and beyond, we're seeing close to 50% or beyond of all designated tracts seeing investment really a long time ago. So these numbers have continued to climb since. And go ahead, next slide. Now we're fast forwarding to the end of 2022, and instead of looking at census tracts, we're just looking at total dollar of opportunity zone equity raised and deployed in OZs in these states. And we can see that by the end of 2022, 24 states had already received $1 billion or more in OZ equity. And the next slide will put this information in per capita terms to kind of normalize it by population. Where again, those states in the Mountain West, states like Utah, Colorado, Arizona, are leading the pack, apart from Wyoming, which is an outlier, leading the pack in the West. These places, typically had very thoughtful zone designation processes. They're also benefiting from population growth, which stoked demand for new housing developments in these communities. But we also see a really wide variety, and more in the eastern half of the country, where Washington, D.C. and then Tennessee lead in per capita terms. But from there, you see Michigan outpacing Florida and some other really interesting variation. The point, though, being, almost every state has seen a really significant amount of OZ fundraising on per capita terms through the end of 2022. Next slide. And the predominant use case so far in OZ investment activity, and we can talk about how this might change in a few, but the predominant use case so far has been in residential real estate, often rental. So think apartment buildings in metropolitan markets. And here our friends at Novogradac, again, with their Opportunity Zone survey, they're counting the number of housing units being registered by the funds that they're tracking in different cities across the country through the OZ incentive. And you have a mix here of, growth poles like Nashville, Austin, major metro areas, as you'd expect on a volume measure like this, such as, New York and Los Angeles up here, as well as some quiet successes. Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati are all in the top 15 here. Washington, D.C. is another city that, has actually been very, it's been one of the kind of most YIMBY, most progressive when it comes to building codes and encouraging housing development in the city limits. And you see that being reflected here at the top of the rankings. So we see OZs OZs actually responding to good local policies too. And a quick aside, one of the reasons that we believe 3 Ohio cities are at the top here is because Ohio has a complementary state income tax incentive to encourage Ohio-based investors to keep their OZ money investing in Ohio OZ projects. Next slide, please. Okay, but looking across the whole national map, what do we see? What kind of impact do we see registering so far? We're looking, so recognizing that OZs have generated really housing construction as its primary kind of market, as the thing is delivered on the market most significantly so far. My colleagues here at EIG used a nice US Postal Service and Department of Urban Development data set to look at address counts by census tracts across opportunity zones and the non-opportunity zone, but kind of similar peer tracts. And we can see that, with a lag, which you'd expect after designation, once you raise money, deploy it, and then actually construct something, starting in the second half of 2021, we see, steep increases in the rate of growth of addresses in opportunity zone census tracts, and then a real boom recently as more and more OZ projects start to come online in cities across the United States, such that, OZ housing and address growth now significantly outpaces that in non-opportunity zone tracts without, there's no evidence here of kind of border hopping or stealing, investments that would have just gone elsewhere. It really does seem to be new supply coaxed on the margins. So that's it for the retrospective. Next slide will be my last one that looks at what's new in OZs 2.0. What can we expect to change from here? So first and foremost, permanence. OZs are now a permanent feature of the US tax code. That means that there will be certainty going forward that this vehicle, which maintains the broad bipartisan support it started with, this vehicle has been deemed by Congress to be positive, be fulfilling its goals of driving investment into distressed communities, and they want to keep it running and give the market that certainty. With permanence, there of course communities change over time, so we need new opportunity zone census tract designations as communities hopefully rise out of poverty or low income status over time. So every 10 years, a new map will be set as governors are called on to nominate a new round of OZ census tracts. And the next map is going to take effect January 1st, 2027, as next summer in July 2026, governors start their next selection process. There will also now be rolling deferrals. This is starting to get into the weeds, but investors, opportunity zone investors can now deposit their capital gains into an opportunity fund really at any point 2027 going forward, and always benefit from a 5-year deferral before they have to pay taxes due on whatever capital gain they rolled into an opportunity fund. That is different from OZs 1.0, where there were fixed dates certain in 2019 and 2021, where you could only defer taxes to the end of 2026. So you ended up, because of that, getting investment cliffs, if you will. This rolling deferral should lead to a much more smoother and kind of continuously interesting investment opportunity for folks down the road. With this, they also investors also get a standard, one-time 10% step up in basis on that deferred gain once it comes due 5 years down the road. And for non-tax folks, functionally a 10% step up in basis means a 10% reduction in the tax that you're going to owe on the money you put into a zone. Of course, the major opportunity zone tax benefit is that any capital gain on an income that you have made in an on an investment that you have made in an opportunity zone and hold for 10 years or longer is totally excluded from capital gains taxes. And that third kind of big OZ tax benefit remains, and there are no real changes to that. Okay, third bullet here, there are new special rural enhancements that was a real priority from this Congress and also from the Opportunity Zone stakeholder field to encourage more OZ capital to not just go to metropolitan markets, but to go to rural markets too. So investors in special rural opportunity funds will benefit from a stronger 30% step up in basis on their deferred gain. This means that they will really, investors almost have a 3 times stronger incentive to put money in a rural opportunity fund, at least when you're thinking about that deferred gain, than one investing in metropolitan areas. Of course, the potential for appreciation on rural investments may be lower. That's why there's this more generous front end kind of step up in basis, but we expect it to really significantly change investor behavior and lead to much more investment in rural OZs. And the legislation also reduced the substantial improvement threshold in rural areas from 100% to 50%. Basically, folks had heard that investors would have liked to buy property, vacant property, say, or dilapidated housing in rural community and improve it, and utilize the OZ vehicle. But it was very difficult to, in rural markets, keep those properties affordable if you had to invest 100% of your basis in order to qualify for OZs. So this 50% substantial improvement threshold is widely believed by stakeholders in the field, including from the rural affordable housing advocacy community, to be meaningful for helping the OZ economics work better in rural areas. Okay, there will also be a stricter, smaller map. The number of opportunity zones going forward, 2020 on the kind of OZs 2.0 map onward, will likely be about 20% smaller than it is today. This is because Congress decided to reduce one of the eligibility criteria to make it more strict. So instead of allowing places to qualify on an 80% median family income criteria, that's been pulled back to 70%. And arithmetically, that reduces the number of eligible zones and reduces the pool off of which governors can choose from. And there will be no more special treatment for Puerto Rico. It'll be treated like any other state. The contiguous tracts provision from OZs 1.0, if you're deep in the weeds and knows what that means, is going to go away. And they've introduced a new median family income cap for any census tract that does qualify on the poverty rate. If it also registers a high median family income, it will not be eligible to be designated as an OZ. This closes the loopholes of some problem tracts that kind of slipped in because they were changing very quickly on the ground. Last but not least, reporting and transparency. Opportunity Zone funds will now have to provide detailed project level information to the IRS, information on housing units created, job estimates, and affordability measures from the investments in their portfolio. And then Treasury is going to have to report aggregated but still detailed tract level information to the public yearly on the amount of quaff assets, as well as tract investment levels and whether or not the tracts have registered any OZ investment and across how many projects. And Treasury will also be responsible for 5-year reports that will assess the impact of OZs on outcomes like on kind of demographic outcomes, on job outcomes, tract-wide, to really study, make this, at the end of the day, one of the most studied and transparent incentives out there. Okay, that's it. Thank you for a chance to walk through all that.
Well, thank you, Kenan. We'll come back on some other questions, but Nick, want to be able to let you get into your experience and talk about some of the work you've done leading this effort on the investor side.
Sure. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and Kenan did a great job summarizing the existing program and the 2.0 program. He and his colleagues at the Economic Innovation Group have really been champions in terms of providing information and leading the charge. So great to be here with you, and appreciate everything that you're doing over at the EIG. We are, as you mentioned, investors. Our capital comes from the wealth channel predominantly, investors that are working with financial professionals trying to solve issues. So I have a capital gain. how do I want to allocate the proceeds of that capital gain? That's been the DNA of our business since the mid 90s. We have raised $17 billion of capital through that channel, variety of different investment vehicle structures, sponsored $23 billion of investment strategies. And we became interested in the Opportunity Zone Fund benefit when we were looking at the draft legislation. And to be candid, our initial reaction was this is just kind of a tax concept, and I'm not sure it makes sense as an investment concept. And our view as investors are, what's the point of doing something unless the investment is a good underlying investment? But we started digging in, talking to stakeholders, and recognized that the investment opportunity made a lot of sense, and particularly for the housing space. So we launched our first fund, then we launched our second fund, third fund, fourth fund. As you mentioned, we've raised $2 billion of equity. Proud to say we've been able to develop 10,000 plus multifamily units across the country because of this program. And yeah, I believe firmly, particularly in our case, that this capital formation would not have taken place without the combination of incentives that the program offers. And the problems that it solves for those that are investing in it, as well as the benefits that the communities receive that are the recipients of the capital. So I don't know if you can go to the next slide here or not, but if you look at our portfolio, I mean, we are geographically diversified in predominantly high growth markets. And these are markets that have seen tremendous amount of population migration. If you think about the underlying economic environment when the program started, interest rates were low, economy was kind of moving along. Then we had a pandemic, we had a change in rates, we had inflation. All of those things have had different impacts on different communities in different ways. But what we saw post-COVID was a tremendous amount of population migration. Folks effectively had been living at home, they'd been living with roommates, and they decided during the pandemic, because their environment changed, that they wanted to move to different parts of the country. Maybe they wanted different weather, maybe they wanted to be closer to family, maybe they just wanted a change. And so when we saw all of that mobility and we saw interest rates go down, we saw a huge increase in the cost of single family home ownership in a very short period of time. And as a function of that, housing affordability in a lot of these markets became acutely challenged. And then we went into a period where, because we had done what we did to solve the issues through the pandemic, we had inflationary pressures and interest rates went up. And so that has stymied mobility within the single family market. It's made it harder for developers to make development make sense. And so having a combination of these incentives that provide real solutions for folks that are having pretty significant events, whether it's embedded gains in their equity portfolios, they're trying to de-risk, whether they're selling a business, whether they're selling real estate, to have the ability to channel that capital into something that provides a better financial planning and investment outcome for them, but also solves a really important issue within the markets in which we're investing, which is housing supply, is sort of the best of conceivable worlds that you could have come up with when you started a program like this. And so, you know, our view is the underlying investment has to make sense, but it helps make sense, particularly when you have pressure on operating costs and building costs and elevated interest rates for extended period of time. It also helps when, from an investment perspective, people are rotating away from real estate because it's an uncertain environment as interest rates go up. So to be able to channel capital towards the creation of housing in markets that are getting structurally less affordable at a time when normal capital flows would not go towards that use has been really, really additive in terms of creating more accessibility for housing within the markets in which we have invested. Next slide, if you don't mind. This is a great example. So this is a project that we did in partnership with our partners at Greystar. Greystar is the largest multifamily developer in the US. We have a long-term relationship with them. This is in the Brewers Hill kind of Canton neighborhood of Baltimore. This is really an anchor project for what has become a mixed-use development. So there's retail, other residential communities that have gone in, grocers, and has been able to attract young folks to this neighborhood that historically have not lived there. The master development is actually the redevelopment of an old oil refinery. So taking an old use, taking advantage of brownfield credits, and layering on the OZ, we were able to create 500 units and really be an anchor in a neighborhood that has now become a lot more vibrant as a function of this capital going in. So a really good example of a project that might not have been developed if not for the combination of incentives here to make it make sense for investors. In addition to that, just a great example, being able to take an old defunct use and turning it into something that creates a lot of value for a neighborhood and a community. And if you look at the next slide, I think what is really rewarding about sort of the work in general is through our partnership with IMPLAN, we're able to effectively demonstrate what is happening in these communities as a function of our investment. So if you look at the job creation, you look at the direct effect and the indirect effect, it's really powerful. I mean, I think what most people don't realize is when you build a multifamily community of this size, these residents are going to the local dry cleaner, they're going to the local yoga studio, they've got dog walkers while they're at work, they're frequenting the restaurants during the week and on the weekends. So the ability to generate revenue for these communities and for these businesses to create a vibrant community is the byproduct of our ability to go in and attract people to a neighborhood that they wouldn't necessarily be able to access on their own. So phenomenal result of a great program. And the reason why we chose to publish a report like this is because we believe firmly in the intersection of capital formation and impact. And if you can demonstrate those two things are happening, particularly when you're going through a period where the legislation might have been expiring. There was certainly bipartisan, bicameral support to renew it, but there wasn't great recent data to be able to demonstrate some of the phenomenal impact that these programs are having. So as stakeholders in the business, we felt like it was important for us to be able to demonstrate more broadly how important this program is to the communities that are receiving this investment. And frankly, I will say, I think it's also important to be able to go to stakeholders within these communities and say, if you're thoughtful about how you designate these zones and you work with private sector capital, these jobs can be yours, and this capital investment can be yours, and create all of these spillover effects that are so important to helping these communities have socioeconomic growth and advancement. So anyways, we felt like it was important to be able to report on this stuff. We loved the tool that IMPLAN provided us, and that's why we chose to use IMPLAN to be able to demonstrate not only to our investors, but to the communities and to the broader Opportunity Zone Fund investment community, how important this program is.
Well, I'll jump in, and I appreciate that. I mean, it's excellent overview on both of your work and the program thus far. And I think the questions we get and the questions we're asking of ourselves of how the program and the reforms can will change the types of projects, the scope, and the need for analysis going forward. I maybe just kind of jump into it, Nick. You talk about your work on a multifamily, and I've heard you speak eloquently about the connection between opportunity zones, housing unit formation, housing affordability. Certainly, this policy came at a time of sort of peak affordability concerns, and in many ways those haven't been alleviated in many markets, most markets. So could you speak to a little bit more about the connection between opportunity zones and housing unit creation? You spoke about some projects and how those units would likely not have been formed if not for opportunity zones. But speak a little about that connection and maybe how you see some of the changes in the law impacting that further going forward, both in the rural side and in some of the more urban areas too.
Chris, that's a lot to unpack. Let me start by saying, I think the most important component here, well, they're all important, but when I look at the new legislation, the things that we were really advocating for that we find to be impactful as investors make decisions to invest in this program or not is number one, permanency. So it's there, you're focused on it. The professional community can really dig in and know that they have something that's sustainable here. So you'll see, compliance firms, tax professionals, legal professionals really focus on this, which is important, and will grow the business and will grow awareness. I mean, in our experience, it's all about education. Once people really understand the program, then they become very interested in it. But it is a complicated program, and as a function of that, there's a lot of bad information. And initially, people thought, that we were speaking to, I thought the benefits were really good when this started, but hasn't some of the benefit gone away because some of the basis step up sunsetted over time and the deferral period wasn't as long as it once was? We fixed that, right? And so to Kenan's comment earlier, capital formation is going to be more ratable going forward. Now everybody knows they have a permanent solution. They know they're not disadvantaged based on when they place capital into the program relative to somebody else. And so what you're going to see is this is a tool that people are going to focus on and use in the professional community that helps really make it go. Will dedicate more resources to it. So I think that's really terrific and important. And I can't say effusively enough how important I think that rolling deferral is, because as people get closer to that deferral period, even though the biggest benefit here is long-term tax-free growth, people feel like they've been disadvantaged because their deferral period isn't as long. So eliminating that issue is awesome, and I think will lead to ratable capital formation over time. In terms of use case, look, we are housing market investors, and the reason why we love this program is because we are able to build housing in communities close to employment centers, close to amenities that people could not access because single family home ownership is prohibitive. So they want to rent. The more housing supply that you create, the more affordable housing becomes. I believe that firmly. All of the economists I follow in the housing space that I think are knowledgeable will reiterate that. I see Kenan nodding his head, which is great. So the more supply that we can create, the more affordable housing is going to become. So I think that use case in urban markets is still going to exist and be really important and useful. In terms of the other dynamics, the reason why I think so much of the capital went to housing initially was because it was very clear that we needed housing. As I articulated earlier, interest rates were low, capital was abundant, and we had people effectively moving all across the country, creating a need for housing. As a function of that, everybody could be a developer because it was easy to raise equity and debt capital was inexpensive, so the projects worked, right? It is more difficult in the environment that we're in today, and it's a lot more competitive because all of that supply is now delivering. So as real estate investors, are there other sectors that now potentially also make sense? I think the answer is yes. I think the reason, again, housing was just so obvious and it was easy to create because of the capital structures that developers could avail themselves of at that time. So I think you'll see more equitable capital formation across different sectors of the property markets, depending on what the need is in the investment case. The rural OZ component is interesting to me. I don't see it necessarily being a huge catalyst for housing formation. As investors, the biggest benefit here is long-term tax-free growth. If you think about what drives that from an investment perspective, it's scarcity. So land value goes up over time, replacement cost goes up over time, net operating income grows over time because you have the demand side of the equation. In more urban markets, that exists, in more rural markets, that's a little bit harder, right? You've got lower land basis. If you don't create sort of a master development where more people want to come and create that demand, I think it gets a little bit harder to drive value over time in that sense. I think there's phenomenal potential use cases in rural OZs for infrastructure and manufacturing infrastructure, ag infrastructure. And I think if governors are thoughtful here, they will be able to generate a tremendous amount of private sector capital formation, as well as housing to support it, right? So if you build a massive manufacturing facility, you also need housing for those employees. I think about some of the infrastructure related stuff like hyperscalers. You need power. So if you can get the power there, that's the key. But you need a lot of land. A low land basis is really helpful. And it doesn't necessarily matter that you're in a high density area. I think about clean energy projects. I think all of that has really interesting use case here. Think about industrial assets potentially on the real estate side. But I think the housing investment is going to be more concentrated to urban markets. I think the infrastructure and potentially the industrial use case is more suited for potentially rural.
Well, I appreciate that. And I gave you a big question. I appreciate you unpacked it well, so thank you. But I think that segues to, question for you, Kenan. When you wrote in one of your recent articles, when describing the types of projects that OZ 1.0 saw, you can't prescribe that array of outcomes. You can only make space for them, referring to the nature of the program. How do you see these changes again impacting? I'll just let you maybe build on what Nick said in terms of the types of projects, and maybe intertwine that with how reporting will give us some greater visibility into the nature of those investments and where they're really being made.
Yeah, definitely. And loved a lot of what Nick was saying there. So hopefully I'll be able to kind of build on that here too. The one, I think it's a beautiful thing about opportunity zone incentives, but one of the things that can make other people feel uncomfortable is that it really doesn't prescribe outcomes or activities. It says it's broadly based, market-based incentive, that says the federal government believes putting private capital to work in a range of activities in low-income communities is a good thing that we need more of. And that's as far as the federal government really goes, just some stipulations, making sure it's additive, new, substantial improvements. And that means you get a whole variety of potential use cases. I think we've seen through that the magic of the market work again in a way, and in spaces that we had grown almost uncomfortable with that idea, which I think is deeply damaging for distressed communities, because the foremost thing to do is reintegrate places into the nation's economic fabric. So if you just think on the housing supply point, I completely agree with Nick and the faith and evidence that housing is a market and that supply and demand respond to set the price and affordability level. And if opportunity zones had been just a strictly affordable housing program, we might have seen 5 to 10% of the investment that we did see, and have a few thousand units that are affordable, but have had none of the market-wide effect, none of the and the equilibrium price of housing in metropolitan areas would never have responded to an incentive that narrow. You would have further kind of reduced the scope of the investors that can take part in it, and the capital gains that you're going to get active in the space. And I think the temptation to prescribe outcomes just kind of narrows the scope and narrows the ambition so quickly that you end up not necessarily achieving as much as you could. To some of Nick's earlier points of describing, the Lucy, I think that is in many ways a quintessential OZ investment. It's happening on brownfields land, which is very common, or in like rehabilitating or utilizing adaptive reuse of old industrial land. There are many parking lots in mid-sized cities across the country that actually have a higher economic use, it turns out, and OZ incentive kind of unlocked that potential. And now their mixed use developments bringing business and housing and all back into communities. But even if that's the quintessential investment, you just see such a range of other activities. And here I'm thinking in rural areas, we have already seen, rural areas seem to be more responsive on the industrial, the manufacturing, some of the commercial, and of course agricultural development side of things, where it's kind of a much more balanced portfolio of investments in rural OZs across industries than you get in metropolitan areas. We expect that to evolve and grow even further as we've been discussing with these extra incentives for rural areas. In part, rural areas, they might not be able to compete on that long-term upside on residential investment returns, but on building a business and delivering products and services to markets, they're just as competitive, I think, as metropolitan areas. And there's, I know, this case study out of Brookville, Indiana, where there was a local business owner family that they were retiring, they wanted to get out of the business. They ended up having, I believe it was a $50 million or so capital gain, and they reinvested it all through opportunity zones into their downtown. They also started a pharmacy. They saved the local newspaper with the money, and they did all sorts of great things in this community that was their backyard that they never had a vehicle to do that before. And that's the sort of kind of flexibility and open-endedness that you get with OZs, but you don't get elsewhere. You can't do historic revitalization of a main street, build a hotel, put housing in it, and save the local newspaper, with any other structure out there. So I think that says it all. I'll stop there for now. Oh, and we can talk about reporting, Chris, if you want to come back to that.
Well, we're getting some good questions coming in, and I think I'd like to kick it back to Candy quickly, and then we'll try to intertwine some of the questions. We're getting a flood, so we'll see how many we can get to. But I think the 2 points you bring up, I think just both of you brought up in terms of now certainty, predictability with the program and the permanency and the flexibility, I think are 2 staples that really, I think will enhance the leverage here going forward. So Candy, I think there's a lot of questions around the reporting, the measurement of impact. So would like for you to go through some of the key considerations, in your mind as you talk with clients about how IMPLAN is applied here.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Just to go through how this looks inside of IMPLAN, there's a few key considerations we always want to start with. That's going to be, what area are we looking at? What's the geography? Are we looking at a city? Are we looking at a county? Do we want to link that to the remainder of the metropolitan statistical area, state, and the rest of the US? In terms of something like a portfolio company, we can look at the projects across the country based on exactly where they are. We then need to look at the industry that it is in. So if we're talking about multifamily construction, or we're talking about a new pharmacy operations, things like that, there's different industries that we would examine inside of IMPLAN. And then we can look at the fiscal impacts and make connections to other incentives that might be available as well. So how that looks, we can always start at our region screen and pick our region, and then link those via multi-regional input-output analysis, or what we call MRIO, so that we see the spillover effects between regions. We have a project that may be happening in Cleveland, Ohio, but we want to see how that looks on the remainder of the county and the remainder of the MSA as well. We link all of those regions via MRIO. In terms of the inputs, we have 528 different industries inside of IMPLAN to choose from. You can modify the event level data to reflect exactly what your business is going to look like with those project specific details that you know. And for fiscal impacts, our results will show you the local, state, federal revenue, the local being broken out into sub-county general, your city and township tax, and then your sub-county special district, which is police, fire, things like that. And if you know anything special, you can customize that direct impact for your specific project and then demonstrate the returns, not only in the direct effect to all levels of government, but also to the other regional connectors. The most fun way to do this inside of IMPLAN is to check out our guides. We have 7 available for your use. The top 4 that I've listed here are most applicable to our opportunity zone analysis. That's a construction and operations, a mixed-use development, looking at an existing firm, or the transition to green energy. And these guides are a step-by-step way to walk you through the entire process of setting up your impact. So with that, Chris, I will throw it back to you if we want to look at a few of those questions that have come in.
Okay, great. And for those of you that need to drop at 2, apologies, we had a few technical issues and didn't get started right at 1 o'clock. But thank you all very much for joining. I do want to make sure we get to our questions and have a little bit of a discussion. I just can imagine we might go a few more minutes here and want to at least initially thank all those for joining. And we'll be sure to follow up with the presentation and additional resources, and always happy to talk with you about your questions on either the modeling front, the policy front, or how others are working in your area. But to kind of get to I think the crux of some of the questions that we're getting around the reporting. I mean, Kenan, you got into some of the specific reporting requirements that will be coming, that the Opportunity Zone funds will need to be reporting. Do you think that will get into the level of the ability to look at the types of, say, housing units that are being created going forward? And do you know if any of that information exists specifically around unit types, around luxury, affordable, market rate? And again, Nick, I'm not sure if you have any insight here from your work.
Yeah, I'll get started, sure. So to my knowledge, the legislation only, so it does call for like reporting number of housing units created, if that's your relevant metric, and just what percentage of those are affordable. It doesn't say what affordable is in statute though, so Treasury will have to interpret that. And my sense is that yeah, they may just they'll probably adopt some sort of standard kind of area-based measure and just report that one tier, kind of affordable versus market rate or rest, rather than further differentiate between luxury and some other kind of more real estate industry terms of art. But Nick, I'm curious if you've heard anything else or expect anything different.
I have not. I mean, outside of reporting, as you articulate, number of housing units created, jobs, investor level information, no noticeable definition of how you define different components of housing.
Fantastic. On the reporting side, and maybe a question for you, Nick, if you've run into this. I mean, the question is, do you work with institutional capital partners? And I guess the question is two-part. And if so, do you see demands from that sort of investor base, that type of investor base, related to economic impact analyses alongside financial or something like detailed project information? So I guess the question, to kind of break that down, I mean, we don't see the type of impact reporting that you've done as an explicit requirement from a policy or from a government standpoint. But do you see any of those requirements across the market, either for local institutions, local organizations, or other institutional investors?
So our constituency does not require it, and I think that's particularly because we don't have a specific mandate to invest capital in that way. So I do know that there are some community banks that have invested capital in this space, kind of smaller institutional investors, if you consider a bank or an insurance firm an institutional investor, I suppose we would. And because they have a specific mandate in a lot of cases that they're fulfilling in terms of making that investment, my guess is that there are reporting requirements. We don't have a sustainable investing mandate or an affordable housing mandate that we are fulfilling for our investors. So I would imagine if you are, then you are required to demonstrate that's how your capital is being invested.
Great. One question, and we talked about this, briefly, Kenan, and I read the HUD's sort of best practice report on opportunity zones that really featured a lot of great information at this, how states and local governments have, in many ways, added additional policy or looked to leverage opportunities in the most sort of effective way. A question that came in is, have you seen any quote unquote model legislation that you might suggest to legislators, I guess conceivably at the local level, that would further leverage OZ funds to communities within their state? So just curious if there's additional best practice ideas on your mind. And I think that does overlap with some of the other reporting requirements, may not be for institutional investors, but there's other local partners that obviously want to understand regional impacts. But question, generally is, have you seen any model legislation or have general ideas on how local governments can further leverage?
Yeah, good question. I think the Ohio model definitely jumps to mind if that's of interest to particular states of trying to corral and keep local capital local and investing in the state. I think that extra incentive has had meaningful impact, especially in a state that has older legacy cities and but a lot of complementary state level policies to try to revitalize the downtowns of Ohio's many beautiful cities. So I think here the private capital of OZs is coming in alongside really well, a lot of public both state and local government efforts to complement them and really almost make sure that they reach a critical mass of neighborhood revitalization and around. And it's not just downtowns, but many urban neighborhoods and kind of on the periphery of the urban cores that have been sweet spots. I think some other models that I really like, two others. So one is in Alabama. The state government and the utility, I forget the name for it down there, but the big state utility came together to fund a grant for a nonprofit statewide intermediary organization called Opportunity Alabama that had a rural focus even before OZs 1.0 that recognized it's going to be hard to get Alabama on the map on the radar of national investors, and maybe they'll be able to find good projects, or maybe they'll be able to find someone with a capital gain locally who wants to reinvest locally, but it'll be really hard absent some sort of kind of ecosystem intermediary to put all those pieces together and kind of match, especially match really good high impact projects with investors committed to the state of Alabama. And that grant was really from the state and the utility, I think was catalytic in helping cement that institutional and civic entrepreneurship and innovation that sprouted around OZs that really made this a very impactful project. And many of my favorite best practice case studies have come from the state of Alabama now in high impact OZ investments, largely because of that sort of organization. And then a third model would be state of Colorado. They included a whole suite of different programming kind of after OZs 1.0 was passed to help rural communities build capacity around OZs and understand how they might benefit from the incentive and make investment prospectuses. They had a cohort program for an accelerator program for entrepreneurs from particular backgrounds or corners of the state to kind of train them up for trying to pitch or be ready to receive OZ capital to grow their business. And they really just thought through a lot of aspects of the the connective tissue from how do we actually link up this capital and these investors to the outcomes we want to see on the ground.
Well, I mean, that's fantastic. I appreciate those examples, and I encourage those listening to be able to dive in and dig into some of those examples, as they're generally pretty well documented and some good information out there. But that's a great high level perspective. You know, we're past time. We should have scheduled, you know, 2 hours here, Candy. I know Nick would have given us a lot more here, but no, I appreciate and wanted to wrap up. I appreciate you both taking the time to jump on here quickly at a short notice and give us some really invaluable insights. You know, as an organization that focuses on, emphasizes detailed and impactful analysis and research, really deeply value both of your thought leadership and reporting on this, and look forward to what you put out here in the future. We've had a great response, so expect to see a lot more work and analysis done here with the additional reporting requirements. That'll be, I think, a very rich area for researchers, economists to continue to dig through and help understand and, again, leverage going forward. So thank you both for your work. Thank you, Candy, so much for helping me organize and appreciate all your work. And we look forward to talking to you all sooner next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye all.